Welcome to our session this morning, and we are going to get going here. We're going to start this morning with the land acknowledgement, and we acknowledge that ONLIT's work takes place on the traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live. So welcome to our session this morning. And we are going through phoneme awareness this morning, so chapter 3. And this week and next week are going to be our last morning sessions. So we're going to go through phoneme awareness today, and we're going to go through phonics next week, next Wednesday, from 9 to 10. And then we are all going back to school. So we are going to move to evening sessions. And we are going to be working from 7:30 to 8:30 every second Wednesday to go through the last 4 chapters. So fluency, reading comprehension, vocabulary, and then bringing everything together. So this morning, we are going to do what we always do. We're going to do a whole lot of chatting together. We're going to go into a short 5-minute little discussion group and then come back, chat a little bit more. And then I'm going to send you off for an interactive task today where you're going to work together with a student sample of writing. And we're going to look through that and see how we can really tease out that phonemic awareness piece and what we might do about that. And then we're going to come back, wrap it up, and we do have a prize this morning. And our prize this morning is 7 Mighty Moves. So stick around to the end. We will randomly pull someone's name out and send them that great book. So again, we are working through chapter 3 in our next steps in literacy instruction. And hopefully you had a chance to read through this chapter. And if you didn't, please don't worry about it. We are going to go through quite a lot today, and go back and take a look when you can. So chapter 3, and we're going to start with our first key takeaway. Phoneme awareness is one of 5 key pillars that were identified by the National Reading Panel. It's also important to note that the Ontario Human Rights Commission identified in its recommendations that phonemic awareness is a key foundational skill for word reading, and that it needs to be taught intentionally and explicitly beginning in kindergarten. So what is phoneme awareness? It's the awareness that words are made up of individual sounds. That is the ability to identify, to isolate, and manipulate phonemes. So that is to blend them together, to segment them in words that makes it possible then for readers to understand that letters represent sounds in speech. It is also the single best predictor of at-risk status for early reading difficulty. So there are decades of research to show that students who struggle to read have difficulty with phonemic awareness, and that's one of the most fundamental skills for our young readers. Without phonemic awareness, students have serious difficulty decoding, that is reading, and encoding, that is writing, and so therefore learning to read and write. The great news is that phonemic awareness is a teachable skill. We can be really intentional about how we teach beginning readers and how we intervene with struggling readers so that we can support those stronger outcomes. At the beginning of the chapter on page 54, the authors recommend that we shift how we think of phonological awareness. So phonological awareness, you may have seen that umbrella image, that bigger umbrella, which includes words and syllables and rhymes. And they recommend that we use that term, that we change that to phonological sensitivity for larger units of words, and that we focus in on phoneme awareness for that individual sound level work. They explain that the word sensitivity, that bigger, broader, is used because this knowledge may not be a conscious level of awareness, and that because so many students arrive to kindergarten with that phonological sensitivity already in place, so much so that we've been led to mistakenly assume that phonological sensitivity should be taught before we teach that phoneme awareness. In the book, they state that there is no convincing evidence that this is the case. And in fact, that's going to lead to the next point, which is that phoneme awareness can be taught without students first mastering that phonological sensitivity. So they don't need those bigger skills. And this is a big shift in the research around reading development. This is not what we are used to. We always thought we had to teach those bigger pieces first and work our way down. But again, as we know better, we do better. And we're going to come back to that a lot with this chapter. The authors suggest that we should lessen the load by eliminating that time on those bigger chunks of words and get right to the phoneme level with our youngest students. Bigger chunks of words that work at that syllable level, that becomes more important as our students begin to work with bigger multisyllabic words. If you think about it, we speak in a steady stream. We don't pause between each word, and our students really need to be able to distinguish between these sound units or the boundaries between words. For proficient reading and writing, they need to be able to distinguish between phonemes or individual sounds within those words. And for students who struggle, this is really hard, and it's hard for a few reasons. All sounds get mushed together or co-articulated, and some phonemes or sounds are easily confused. If you think the t and d, or the f and v, or sh and j. So it makes sense that instruction with these phonemes has to be our top priority. A note, as we dig a little bit deeper here, the research around reading development is ongoing, and science is evolving and finding new ways and sometimes better ways of doing things and making learning and development more efficient. So work around phonemic awareness has shifted since we have really gotten into this work from the very beginning. And this idea of moving right into phonemes right away without those bigger pieces is challenging for some. And as we learn more, we do better. And Sandra's going to go ahead and post a link into the chat to a really great YouTube video from Susan Brady. And that's where this all kind of started to make a little bit more sense to me. This is structured literacy. This is not a set program. This is not a set way of doing things. Structured literacy, direct explicit instruction, and what is often referred to as the science of reading, that's evolving. So as we know better, we do better. So if you do have a chance, take a look at that video, but really it's the idea that our youngest students are working with often single syllable words. So they don't need to be spending time at the syllable level breaking down those bigger pieces, right? They need to be working with those individual sounds as soon as possible. So our next key takeaway, and if you could please make sure that you're on mute if you're listening until we get into those breakout rooms. Second key takeaway is, again, this idea that working at the phoneme level is critical. So you can see this referenced in the book at the bottom of page 54 and at the top of pages 58 or 59 and 68. And we're going to give you another link to another resource. This is the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast, episode 181 with Matt Burns. And it's what research says about phonemic awareness. So that's in the chat. And in this podcast, Matt Burns talks about the importance of phonemic awareness in reading instruction. And he says that you can't sound out a word if you can't take the sounds you make and blend them together. You can't sound out a word if you can't segment the sounds. So those basic skills of isolating, blending, and segmenting are absolutely crucial building blocks to being a good reader. In a study that he conducted, they saw that blending and segmenting and isolating in at least kindergarten and grade 1 predicted successful reading development. And he goes on to say that these 3 skills are what we need to teach our students. These are the skills that our kids don't seem to necessarily have, so they need to be taught. And those are the ones that are the best predictors of successful reading. So this is a very simplified version of the Language Foundations Continuum from the new language curriculum. So you can take a look up there. And we will share that link in the chat, but it's just Appendix A from the language curriculum. And we can see in this continuum that we see these 3 skills of phonemic awareness reflected in the new curriculum right from the beginning, and our students are working right away with phonemes and not with those larger chunks of sounds. In the K1 column, we are identifying and isolating phonemes. In grade 1, we are blending and segmenting. And this curriculum really is a reflection of what research shows is best practice for instruction. A note about that K1 column in the Language Foundations Continuum. We know that the curriculum as it is now applies to grades 1 to 9 and not to kindergarten, and that the updated kindergarten language curriculum kindergarten curriculum is coming in 2025. That said, curriculum writers were very aware of the prerequisite skills needed before jumping into the expectations for grade 1. So this K1 column denotes the knowledge and skills that children need to acquire before they can move on to the required learning in the next column. Some may have already acquired this learning before entering grade 1, while others have not. Ensuring that all students have this foundation sets them up for success and enables them to build on their learning from grade to grade. All right. Keep rolling. So we're going to continue with this idea of best practice. And what the research suggests, the authors do an amazing job of outlining a progression of phonemic awareness skills. And this chart guides the selection of practice words from simpler to more complex. So in terms of the typical development of phonemic awareness, in kindergarten, we're working at that vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, CVC, right? With the C being consonant, the V being vowel level. First with initial phonemes, sounds, then with final phonemes, and then that middle vowel sound. In grade 1 and up, our students should be working with more complex syllable patterns that move from containing 1 or 2 or 3 consonant blends. So you can see this graphic moves from having our students work with words that have simple syllable structures to more complex, from fewer to more sounds. Note that these are generalizations. They may not apply to all students and classes, so continue to meet your students where they are at their level and take them to the next step. The authors tell us, and it makes sense, that for most students, blending is easier than segmenting, which means that sometimes we need to spend more time on segmenting. We need to remember that these are reciprocal skills, and it's recommended that students work with the same word for both blending and segmenting tasks. What they are decoding, they are then encoding or spelling, and vice versa. We also want to remember to connect the meaning of the word that we are using to continue to develop vocabulary. Another important consideration is that we don't need to wait until our students achieve mastery at one level before we can start to develop skills at another level. Research suggests, and this is a quote, some proficiency at one level enables a child to begin to gain proficiency on more complex skills, all while advancing proficiency on the less complex skills. So one more point, and this is a bit of an oversimplification, but a good generalization, that we can group all consonant and vowel sounds into 2 broad categories. The stops, and that's where the airstream is completely blocked and then released. So we think of things like t, d, p, right? Or continuance, where the air is impeded but still allowed to flow out of the mouth. So think s, l. It's easier for our kiddos to work with those continuant sounds first, because they can do what's referred to as connected phonation or continuous blending. So saying something like so is much easier to hear when it's sounded out, because we can stretch those sounds out and really hear them blend together. So asking a child, what is the first sound you hear in so, is much easier than saying, what is the first sound you hear in toe? Since we can stretch out that. So we do want to start when possible with continuance, because stops are harder since we can't stretch them out without distorting or adding that that schwa sound, like b or t or k. It's nearly impossible to remove that schwa sound entirely, but we want to clip it as much as we can. Even for continuant sounds, we want to be really aware of our pronunciation. And Sandra did post a link in the chat to that articulation handout. So it is up there. That helps out. I find taking some time practicing in the mirror with those sounds, making sure you're not adding that schwa. So we're saying instead of m, because you can see how that might impact decoding and encoding when our students are adding sounds. Not to mention that additional cognitive load in trying to hear and to decode. Okay. So another key takeaway, and I can see questions in the chat, and I will come back to them when you are in the discussion group, and then we will bring them, we'll have a little chat about them when you get back. So another know better, do better moment for me here. There's been a lot of talk in education circles over the last several months about this key takeaway. Integrating instruction of letter names and letter formation, that handwriting, is going to give us more. It's going to impact outcomes in a better way than doing oral-only phonemic awareness work. Programs like UFly integrate all of that together. The authors explain that while phonemic awareness is an oral skill, we now know that the best way to teach is not in the dark, but with the lights on, so that students can see the teacher articulate and also associate the sounds, the phonemes, with the letters, that is the graphemes that have been taught. Phonemic awareness is like the Velcro. or I've heard it referred to as the parking lot for the phonics. It's the Velcro or the parking spot that allows the letter sound knowledge to stick to it. Quick note about French immersion. If you are working in French immersion, there's an underlying set of skills that allow readers to learn to read using letter sound information to decode a word. So you can tell me the sounds you hear in cat or shut or flig, the language and meaning doesn't matter in phonemic awareness. Students who have that strong phonemic awareness are on track to be good readers in both languages. Students have weak phonemic awareness are probably going to struggle in both languages. So the importance in French immersion then is really the association with the meaning in the word once it's decoded. So think the top part of Scarborough's reading rope. We looked at that in session 1 or session 2, I believe. We're going to look more at vocabulary development and comprehension in a couple of weeks, but for now, consider how our English and French immersion teaching teams could tackle this together, right? What should the focus be for each educator, and how is that going to result in better reading outcomes for our students? So, guiding principles. Here are a few other considerations regarding phonemic awareness instruction, in addition to what we've already mentioned, things like combining letters and handwriting and focusing on isolating, blending, and segmenting. And just take a look at that. How are we going to teach that phonemic awareness? We're going to be explicit. We're going to be systematic. We're leaving nothing to chance. It's not a discovery learning piece here. We're thinking about sprinkling throughout the day. Lots of opportunities as we move through the day. We're going to model and we're going to support and we're going to give lots and lots of practice. But the research is saying that we don't need to spend as much time as we initially thought. We're looking at 20 hours per year, which is less than 30 minutes per week. So just really quickly moving through, and at the end of the chapter, we'll take a look at an example of a lesson as to how we might address this. So we are going to get you into some discussion groups, and this is just going to be a short 5-minute discussion as we talk about some of the tools for phonemic awareness. And just a reminder about our group norms contributing to the conversation. Turning your camera on for this part, it is not recorded. The recording will be paused. Being cognizant of different experiences, knowing that we're all coming from different places and different times in our learning, considering each other's viewpoints, engaging critically with the content, and knowing that growing and learning means that you may shift your position or your assumptions and advance your thinking. So in the breakout rooms, we are going to chat a little bit about what you're doing now for phonemic awareness, or what you did leading into this coming school year and how you might be considering switching that up. Maybe chat about what everybody's plans are coming in. How much time are you spending on phonemic awareness? Is the instruction focused on the most important phonemic awareness skills? And are you integrating letters into phonemic awareness instruction? So just a quick 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and do a little more chatting together. Okay, so I hope you had some interesting discussions in your groups, and just, thinking that our job as educators is really to carefully consider which materials, what resources that we are using with our students. And as we collectively learn more about the science of reading, about structured literacy, about effective practice, we have more insight to draw from making these decisions. The purpose of this exercise was not at all to be negative, but just to highlight the importance of being reflective practitioners, and knowing that commercial programs may be modified to best meet the needs of students and to follow research. Programs are great, but we need to be smarter than our programs. We did have a couple of questions about that, the list of words that I had up there. And if you want to take a look in your books on page 61, you will find that it's just straight from the book, and you can dig a little deeper into the questions that you had right there. And hopefully that can answer some of that for you. And we'll stick around at the end if you do want to chat a little bit more. So we are moving back into chapter 3, and we're going to take a look at our next key takeaway. We've talked about what phonemic awareness is. We've talked about why it's important. So now we need to look at assessment, because this is really our starting point. In order to determine the skills our students are working on, we need to assess where they're at. We need to use tools that can provide information about how a child's phonemic awareness is developing, And that can help us to assess reading readiness, especially with our youngest learners. And it can help us to predict that risk for future reading success. The data that we get is really, really valuable in terms of identifying risk and determining how we're going to work through whole class instruction, as well as what we might need to be doing with some smaller groups, some intervention needs. We know that the earlier we give this essential instruction, the better it's going to be, and the better the chance of prevention. So page 63 is going to give us a list of available phonemic awareness measures. Page 64 is going to provide some more explanations. And just in terms of screening, we are looking at that first sound fluency in kindergarten. We're looking at that phoneme segmentation fluency in kindergarten and grade 1. And we are also looking at student spelling samples and student writing samples. And that's going to really help us and give us some insight. And we're going to do that now. So we're going to move into another interactive task. And in that, we are going to actually take a look at some data. So this is a picture. This is the cover page from the Acadiant Screening Student Scoring Booklet. This is one of 3 screening tools that was approved to be used in Ontario with the new curriculum. So this is Acadiant's. There's also AimsWeb and Easy CBM. Your board will let you know what we are using for screening for each board. It'll be one of those 3, and it will be done between the beginning of the school year and mid-November. So you can see on this one here, just as an example, this is the result for one student at the beginning of the year in their phoneme segmentation fluency in grade 1. So this is a task that's timed. It's 1 minute. There's a discontinue rule so that the student isn't frustrated. The teacher gives the student a word. They have to segment all the phonemes. So if the teacher says cat, the student would say cat. And you can see that at the beginning of grade 1, this child got 22, which means they could split 22 words into parts in 1 minute. We can interpret this score based on the research benchmarks, which are up along the side. So if we see on that chart on the left, we know that this child's score is well below the benchmark for this grade at this time of year. And this information tells us that we need to respond instructionally so that this child can be back on track and can learn to read. In other words, we can take this screening data, we can use it preventatively, we can let it inform our instruction. Moats and Tolman say, even before a student learns to read, we can predict with a high level of accuracy whether that student will be a good reader or a poor reader by the end of 3rd grade and beyond. We are also going to share another link to a Reading Road Trip podcast in the chat, and this is with Kareem Weaver, and he talks about the use of screeners from an equity standpoint. It is a very spicy, very good podcast. I really highly recommend that you take a listen. It all comes back to we are screening, and Kareem Weaver says this, we are screening because we love the kids. We want to make sure we can address their needs right away in kindergarten and grade 2. We don't want to wait until they hit grade 3, 4, 5, or worse. And it's never too late. By then, the issues have hardened. We want to get those kiddos right away, right? So get them early. So I highly recommend, if you listen to nothing else, this is the podcast to listen to. Now, what you're going to do, the second point in the key takeaway was that in addition to phonemic awareness screening measures, such as first sound fluency and first sound fluency and phoneme segmentation fluency, spelling samples also give us some really good insight into how students are segmenting phonemes and words. So this is a sample from a student in grade 1. This is a different student. We're going to send you into breakout rooms to look more closely at the samples. I'm going to project a screen into your breakout room with this spelling sample, with the transcript on the side, so that'll help sound things out. We want you to take a look at the writing and discuss what you notice about this child's phonemic awareness skills. So phonics, we're going to talk about this next week. Right now, we're going to talk about phonemic awareness skills. And I'd like you to also, with any time you have left, talk about next steps for instruction. So there are activities in the book, pages 70 to 81, that are going to help work through phonemic awareness. Take a look at those activities. Take a look at this spelling sample. So this is what I'm going to share into your breakout room. There's a lot on there, but just so you know, you've got the student spelling sample, you've got the transcript, and you've got those questions along the top. Okay? So we're going to give you like 12 to 15 minutes here once we get in there to really give you the chance to go through this, and then we'll come back and take a look at what you noticed. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to, it was a very interesting exercise, isn't it? Wait till next week. We're going to look at it again, but from a different perspective. So in looking at this from the phonemic awareness perspective, what did you notice? Does anyone want to be brave and hop on and talk, or put something in the chat about what you noticed before I show you?
So we talked about the beginning and end blends.
Yeah.
That they're missing those for phonemic awareness. So the tried, the CH, and the find. And then they also have some of the long vowels. Yeah, the middle sounds.
Yeah. The student is eating his sounds. It's an interesting. Do you want to explain what that means?
So we've noticed in our group that, for example, he's omitting all the sounds that are very close in the position of tongue position close to his teeth, like ND, LD, in the middle of the word. So he's fine at the beginning of the words and at the end of the words, but in the middle, some sounds are vanishing. So he's eating his sounds.
Yeah. It makes sense too when we think about first we get the beginning sound, then we get the ending sound. The middle is a little trickier. Digraphs are area of developing skill. Yeah. TH digraph is strong. Multisyllabic words are missing endings. And ED is spelled T. Yeah, I still have some kiddos in grade 6, 7, and 8 that do that. That's an interesting one. So let's take a look here at some of the things that I've highlighted. So these are some things that you may have noticed. So there are some strengths for sure in this sample. But if we focus just on the phonemic awareness side of things, we see that this child does have some success with some blends. So look at how they spelled helped, H-E-P-T, right? That twice with the P-T sound, and we talked about that a little bit in the chat. The E-D is spelled with the T sound. If we look at the beginning of the word tried with the CH, chide, we see that sound confusion. In find and helped, we can see that they're omitting that inner consonant sound. Dropping the final consonant sound in some CVCC words. So looked, but wrote look. They also dropped the final consonant sound in able and stomp. And lots of omissions with the word no one now. So overall, it looks like this kiddo can work really well with those 3 sound words with that CVC pattern, but needs some explicit instruction blending and segmenting complex syllables. That's syllables with initial or final consonant blends. Okay. So we're going to look at this again from a different perspective when we come back next week for phonics and kind of discuss a little bit of the difference between that phonics and that phonemic awareness, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, those patterns. But we're going to take a look at key takeaway 5 before we announce our winner, and then hopefully we can stick around for a little bit of question time. And this key takeaway here is, like I just mentioned with some of our older kiddos, we sometimes think that our work with phonemic awareness is over after primary, but it's important that we continue to assess struggling readers' phonemic awareness skills, because if they're weak, they need to be addressed. We need to fill the skill gap regardless of age or grade. And in fact, some of our older readers often need more intensive focus on this. Our curriculum, our language foundations continuum that we posted earlier, they give us a great phonemic awareness expectation for K1. However, we want to ensure that we don't mistakenly assume that all of our students at that point are proficient with phonemic awareness skills, especially because we're still fairly new, right? We're moving into our 2nd year with this curriculum. We're still fairly new with how we're teaching these things, and that may have been missed by some of our students in the past. Going back to that idea that we just looked at with that student spelling, our older students, we can look at those spelling samples to get a really, really good window into their phoneme-related errors, because sometimes those are those students that can kind of squeak by with the reading. And they have all of those compensatory strategies that they've developed, whereas with their writing, there's nowhere to hide. All this to say, some students are going to get that phonemic awareness quickly and easily. Others, especially older struggling readers, including those with dyslexia, have difficulty acquiring that phonemic awareness. They have difficulty perceiving and working with the oral sounds of language, which has really big consequences for future reading development. Pages 56 and 57 of the book have a bit more of a discussion around that phonemic awareness with older students if you do want to take a little bit more time with that. And Maria says, currently teaching grade 7, phonemes and phonemic awareness is still an important part of the daily literacy, and it should be. It's still great to do. So this is a decision tree that we're going to share from ONlit, and it's based on the one found in the book. And it's a really helpful tool in guiding our decisions around assessment and what to do when a child is not at benchmark. And we want to work backwards or get more information about the child's learning. So Sandra posted that up in the chat for you. For our older struggling readers, we're not going to be doing a phonemic awareness universal screener beyond grade 2. It's not there generally, universally, because we don't need to screen phonemic awareness for the whole class with our older grades. However, if a child is below or well below benchmark in their oral reading fluency, which we are doing with those older grades, we can use this decision tree to work our way back to the point where it may make sense to assess for gaps in phonemic awareness skills. And then finally, we are moving back from the assessment to the instruction because the purpose of our assessment is to inform our instruction, right? Anita Archer tells us the magic is in the instruction, and that's what's going to move the needle for our kids. At the end of this chapter, there is a sample phonemic awareness lesson plan with a script, and I highly recommend that you read it and that you even pretend to do it, reading aloud following the script. And then after that lesson plan, the authors have a fantastic toolkit of practice activities, and you'll see that at the end of the next of these 5 chapters around the big 5. You can use the information that you've gathered from your assessment to determine where to begin, what activities to choose, what work you're going to do with those activities. You can take a look at that progression in the curriculum. You can look at the table 3.3 for examples. Yeah, and where we want to start in terms of those words, those CVC words, and building up from there. Page 68 and 69 give us some key reminders as we choose those practice activities. And as our authors, Susan Smartt and Deb Glaser, say to close out the chapter, phonemic awareness is just the beginning. So we are going to get together again next week to talk about phonics. Before we go, Sandra's going to let us know of our winner for today. So we will see you next week. It's our last morning session. We are going to chat about phonics. We're going to go back to that student writing sample again, but look at it from the perspective of phonics and maybe chat a little bit more about the differences there. So chapter 4, phonics decoding, encoding, and word recognition. Thank you, everyone. I will stop the recording and I have a few minutes to stick around if you do want to chat a little bit more. Otherwise, I will see you next week.